Welcome to Digging Deeper, brought to you by California Unearthed. I'm your host, Bob Frazier, and welcome to episode 1. We are off and running. Can't believe I have gotten to this point. I've been thinking about doing a podcast for quite a while and just have not pulled the trigger, but here we are. So I am sitting here with my friend Cheryl Ware, who is helping me with recording episode number 2. We just got done recording episode number 2, and so she is here with me, so you'll hear her probably chime in every now and then.
Hello, it's Hot Donna. I've always wanted to say that. Sorry.
Wow. Well, we're going to leave that in. So, Cheryl has been a friend of mine for about
16, 17 years?
16, 17 years, yeah. I have a YouTube channel called California Unearthed. Hence the reason why this is called Digging Deeper, brought to you by California Unearthed, because this podcast is going to be an extension of my YouTube channel. And so if you like watching YouTube videos and unearthing California history, go check out my YouTube channel, California Unearthed. I will put a link in the show notes that will take you right to it. You can go check that out. I've been doing it for about 4 years. Just like this podcast, it is a work in progress. I'm getting better every video. And hopefully, like this podcast, I will be getting better every episode. So we will see. So episode 1, I want to talk a little bit about myself. And I'm kind of glad that Cheryl is here and we can get some insight from her as well on who I am and why I'm doing this podcast. So number 1, I guess, is why I'm doing this podcast. The reason why I'm doing it is because I realized when I'm doing my videos for California Unearthed, there is a lot of subject matter that I want to talk about, but just isn't video worthy, if that makes sense. Like episode number 2 that we just got done recording isn't really video worthy. I mean, we did a video on the subject, kind of, sort of, but the amount that we just recorded for a video would have been very kind of boring to watch. Having it in the podcast is a lot easier because we could get a lot more information out and I don't have to worry about putting a picture to the words that we're saying, which is kind of neat. So the reason I started the podcast is to unearth some of the California history that just really isn't video worthy. That being said, like I said, if you went back and listened to my trailer, that has to do with oral histories of other Californians as well. I may do videos on those oral histories when I record them. I haven't decided whether I'm going to do that or not yet, but this is a great way to sit down and talk to somebody about their history, about their family history, about themselves, and how that relates to California. And I think that's kind of a really neat thing to do. The main reasons why I started this podcast is the oral histories and to talk about stuff that's not video worthy. And so a little bit about myself. I am a lifelong Californian. I was born and raised in Southern California in Orange County. I am from Fullerton, and I moved up to Northern California, up to Shasta County in 1990 after high school, and I've been here ever since. And real quick funny story, I used to do real estate here in Shasta County until I lost a large part of my eyesight, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But I had a real estate agent I was talking to one time, first time he ever met me, and he says, right off the bat, I think I maybe got 5 words into the conversation, "You're from Southern California, aren't you?" I said, "Well, yes, I am." I go, "How can you tell?" He goes, "It's just the way you talk. You have the Southern California accent." And I just kind of laughed and giggled and went, "Didn't realize Southern Californians had an accent." He goes, "Oh yeah." He goes, "I'm from Southern California and I can tell." I said, "Yeah, that's pretty interesting." It's kind of weird. Made me start to think a little bit. So anyway, here in Northern California. So if you do go to my YouTube channel, you will see quite a few videos here in Shasta County and also the surrounding area. And just because, like I said earlier, I do have a visual impairment. I do not drive anymore as of 2010, as the last time I drove a vehicle, sadly. And that's the one thing I do miss immensely is driving. And so you're probably wondering what happened, why I have a visual impairment, and I will tell that story. The other reason I started this podcast, and I didn't mention earlier, is to inspire others that have a disability, whether it be a visual impairment or hearing impairment or whatever, to just go out and do whatever you like to do and don't let that disability or impairment stop you. I had a gentleman tell me, or a couple people tell me, that I shouldn't bring up my visual impairment on my YouTube channel or on this podcast, and that just made me want to bring it up even more. The reason being is the stigma that people have with somebody with a disability. They think that they can't do normal everyday activities because of that impairment. And so I'm here to prove those people wrong. And I do it every single day, whether it's through my historical videos or just through living my best life. And so hopefully through this podcast and through my words, it will inspire others with disabilities to go out and live their best lives, or it will inspire others that don't have disabilities to have a better understanding of people that do. But let's get into why I have this visual impairment to start off with. So I was born in 1971. My mother has epilepsy. So my mother was taking phenobarbital to not have epileptic seizures. So they believe that the phenobarbital affected my eyesight when I was born. So on the day I was born, my grandmother on my dad's side looked at me and said his eyes are bulging. There's something wrong. And so they took me back and looked at me and realized that I have congenital glaucoma. I was 1 in 2 million to be born with congenital glaucoma. One of my very first memories ever as a child is from the Chalk Hospital in Orange County. I was going into a eye surgery, and I remember the crib that I was in. Now that I think back of it, reminded me of a cage that you put an animal in. It was just a cage around a bed. And I remember that cage around the bed, and I remember being put under for the surgery because they put me under with ether. And I can still smell that ether to this day. It was horrifying. I just remember crying and screaming while they were putting me out. And that's my first memory. That's probably when I was either 2 or 3 years old. They tried a contact lens in my eye when I was about 4 or 5 years old. Obviously, that's not going to work very well. I do remember having to wear a patch on my eye, in one of my eyes. I believe it was my right eye. I had to wear a patch on my right eye for a little while, and that didn't work. So my eyesight, I could see fairly well out of my left eye, and my vision in my right eye was about 2400, which was legally blind in my right eye. So all my sight was out of my left eye. And so growing up, there wasn't too much, went to the eye doctor once every 6 months or once a year or whatever. Nothing big, no dramatic occurrences, nothing like that. And then I moved up here to Northern California after high school. My grandmother, I should say, always worried about me. She never wanted me to go on roller coasters that went upside down or play sports or anything because she always thought I was going to get injured or hurt. So it was an interesting childhood with that. But once I got out of high school, I moved up here to Northern California, went to an ophthalmologist. Very first thing is Dr. Michael Sumption here in Shasta County. And his first comment to me, very first time he met me, have you ever thought of doing a corneal transplant? Nobody had ever mentioned that to me before. And that was in 1990. And so I called my childhood eye doctor and asked him about it. And he said, that won't do any good. It won't do you any good. I wouldn't bother. Don't waste your time. And I got a little discouraged, but And so another 10 years go by. He did put me on a few eye drops, like pressure medication to keep my pressure down until about 2000. In 2000, Dr. Sumption brought up the corneal transplant idea once again. And so this time I said, let's do it. It's been 10 years later. The technology has improved. Everything's improved. Let's give it a shot. What damage can we do? My vision's already at 2400. I can't see out of that eye anyway, so why not?
What do you have to lose?
Exactly. What I have to lose? I did the surgery. Dr. Assumption did an amazing job. And I remember a couple of days after surgery, and I had the bandages off. My wife at the time and I were driving down one of our local streets, and I looked at the street sign, the freeway sign. I covered my left eye, and I almost started to cry because I could read the sign. I read the words on the freeway sign. I'm like, this is incredible. It worked. It really worked. So my vision went from 2400 to 2075. It was incredible. All the naysayers, proved all the naysayers wrong. It was amazing. So we're going to fast forward to 2010. I'm working at Target at the time, doing real estate, working at Target part-time, because obviously the crash of 2008 did not do well for me. And so while I'm at Target working in the back room, my eyesight starts to fail in my left eye. And I remember the right eye is what we had the corneal transplant in. The left eye started to fail. And so I go back to Dr. Sumption, and he tells me that the left eye, the left cornea is starting to fail. Unfortunately, he does not do corneal transplants anymore. He wants to send me down to UC Davis, to the top corneal specialist in the nation. And so I said, why not? If he's the top guy, how can anything go wrong? Well, had the corneal transplant. About a week later, got a horrible infection, and that cornea failed.
I remember that day. It was close to Christmas or after Christmas, and
it was Thanksgiving.
It was Thanksgiving. I knew it was one of the holidays, and You were lying on the couch at a friend's house, and you said you have a headache. You have a headache, and Robert never complains of headaches. He doesn't complain when he's sick or any of that. So I knew something wasn't right.
So this is where Cheryl comes in to the story, because in 2006 I got divorced and I met Cheryl, and Cheryl and I started to date. So this is where she comes in. Her and I are no longer dating, but we are still wonderful, good friends.
We're besties.
We're besties. And so she's right. Yeah, it was Thanksgiving, and I was not feeling well, so I went back down, and that cornea had failed. And so a second corneal transplant.
Well, you had an infection, a really bad infection.
Yes,
too.
I did. I had a really bad infection. So a second corneal transplant, and that one, I got an even worse infection. And I almost lost my entire eye on that infection. I would have had to have the ceramic eye, the fake one, but they saved it. And so that one, the lens got pushed up into the cornea, and they ruined the cornea, ruined the lens. And so they went for a third corneal transplant. This time they did not put a lens in. And the third corneal transplant it worked, but it didn't work as well as it did in the right eye. And so now, I believe this is 2015 at this point, maybe 2014, something like that, with the third corneal transplant. Now it's 2014. And I was feeling, I want to say, very depressed, very sad and very depressed, because I had lost my sight. I had lost a lot of my sight, and I was basically a blind guy, and I'd lived most of my life being able to see. And as of 2010, like I said, I couldn't drive anymore, and I couldn't function the way I used to. I couldn't sell real estate. I couldn't work at Target. I couldn't do anything. I was, it was horrible. And so I went into a really, really deep depression.
And as a friend, seeing Robert go through something like that was hard, because I couldn't say anything to help him get out of it. I couldn't say, I understand, because I can't. I haven't lost my eyesight. So what can you say to somebody who is in that type of what I call a funk? And yeah, it was really tough to see him go through something like that. I wish I could have just popped out one of my eyes and give it to him, but you can't.
And so at that time, my daughter, my wonderful daughter, was going to school. And this is where a couple of these incidents I was talking about earlier come into play. At some point, I had to have a cane, a blind man cane, to get around. And I could see well enough to see people's reactions and facial expressions. My daughter was never embarrassed by me whatsoever. My ex-wife, on the other hand, was. And a lot of people at my daughter's school didn't know how to treat me, didn't know how to act around me because they weren't ever around somebody with a visual impairment or legally blind. And so when I walk into back to school with a cane to be able to get around, I got a lot of stares and a lot of people not talking to me because they didn't know what to say or didn't know how to say it or how to treat me. It was kind of an odd experience. And so it was kind of weird, which just kind of drew my depression even farther down into the depths. But there was one incident that got me out of all of it. My best friend at the time, his mother was passing away with ALS. And she looked at me on her bed, not being able to move, having the feeding tube in. And she asked me, "How are your eyes? How are you doing?" I was like, holy crap. This woman who's dying of ALS is asking me how I am and how are my eyes, and not caring about herself or what was going on, but how I was. And so that basically catapulted me out of that depression and into a whole new reality of I can make something out of myself. I can do something with this. And so I did. I went back to school, went back to Shasta College. I had gone to Shasta College to get my natural resources degree, which I did. And so then I went back to Shasta College to get my history degree. And I thought about what can I do and what do I love to do that I don't have to drive. I love history. So especially California history and local history. So why don't I do that? So I went back to Shasta College, achieved my AA degree in social science, and transferred to Chico State. When I was looking to transfer to a university, I wanted to go to Sacramento State, but that would have been a little more difficult to go to because I had to figure out how I'm going to get myself physically to the university from Shasta County. Chico State was the closest. It is about 90 miles southeast of Shasta County. And so I thought, well, it's not my first choice, but it's the closest and I will do it. And so I decided to go to Chico State and get my history degree. That is a whole nother ball of wax. Since I can't drive, I ended up having to take Greyhound. I went to school on Tuesday, Thursdays. For most of I was there for 5 semesters. And for the most part, each semester was Tuesday, Thursday. And I had visitation with my daughter on Tuesday, Thursday. So luckily, my ex-wife worked with me, and we switched that to do Monday, Wednesday afternoons. And then every other weekend, I would spend my time with her Monday afternoon, jump on the Greyhound bus, go down to Chico, stay with my cousin Ken in Chico. Thank you, Ken, for putting me up for that 5 semesters when I came down. I would stay with him and then go to school the next day, jump back on the Greyhound Tuesday night to come back to Shasta County to have my visitation with my daughter on Wednesday night, just to jump back on the Greyhound to go back down to Chico.
Yeah, I would get off of work on those days, pick you up, and take you to the bus station.
Right.
Just so at least you wouldn't have to walk.
Right. And then the Greyhound bus would drop me off back in Redding around midnight, and then I would have to Uber from the Greyhound station out to where we lived, which was about a $15 ride every time. So luckily I got grants, Pell Grants, and scholarships to cover a lot of that. And I have to say Chico State was absolutely amazing to work with. They have an amazing disability program. I was able to take tests and things like that through that program. They have I think a CCTV along with a program for visually impaired people that goes on your computer to read documents, PDFs out to you. And so Chico State did an amazing job. Yes, there were 1 or 2 professors that didn't understand my visual impairment and didn't work with me very well, but we figured out a way to get around it. So I did achieve my bachelor's degree in history after 5 semesters. And the last semester, I realized I was going for my history teaching degree. And the last semester, there happened to be one class I needed that wasn't being offered that last semester. And so I had to change my degree from a history teaching degree to just a flat history degree. So I have a bunch of extra classes that I took that I didn't need to take. But if I decide that I want to go into teaching, I then at least have those classes under my belt. I believe I only have one more class that I actually have to take to get a teaching credential degree from Chico State. So all that being done as a visually impaired individual. I had one scary experience at Shasta College in around 2015, 2016. I think it was 2015, where my vision was completely clouded over and I had to use my white cane to get around campus and I couldn't see anything. I was lost. And I got so scared, and I will admit it. I don't admit when I'm scared, but I was scared because I didn't know where I was. I didn't know where I was going. And somehow I knew the layout of Shasta College, and I figured out how to get to the class I needed to get to. And it was one of the most scariest experiences of my life. And I don't think I ever shared that with Cheryl or anybody else.
No, you never told me that.
So once I got my history degree, I said, well, now what do I do? You know, who's going to hire me being a visually impaired person? And as I was working on my history degree, I was doing an internship with the Shasta Historical Society and developing their oral history program, which was really neat. We were working with the local native Wintu tribe here in the area and starting a oral history program at Shasta Historical Society. And I was on the ground floors of that and I thought that was pretty cool. And so while I was doing that, my daughter and I went out, and I remember it like it was yesterday. We were out at tunnel number 6 that was exposed from Shasta Lake. So basically, the water level had dropped so much that the old train tunnel and train tracks were exposed. I was talking to my daughter as we were getting ready to go through the old train tunnel and giving her my ideas about starting a YouTube channel and what we should call it. And she came up with the name California Unearthed. And I thought, that's brilliant. I love it. Absolutely love it. And so California Unearthed was born. And her and I did the first couple of videos. I think the first video that we did was on the drive-in theaters of Reading. And my daughter's in that video. And then she accompanied me to the Whiskeytown Cemetery video that we did. And then she went off and did her high school years and then now off to college. So she doesn't show up on very many videos anymore. I need to get her on another one at one point. But that is where Cheryl comes in here as well. Sometimes when Cheryl is feeling froggy and wants to get out, I said, come along, let's go film a historic video, and she is my camera person. So if you've watched or if you're going to watch the latest video I just did on Peter Lassen and the Benton City, Cheryl was the camera person for that video. And I think I put her in a couple of videos here and there. I kind of sneak her in when she's not knowing.
I don't mind, though. I actually enjoy going out if it's not too hot. I don't do well in heat, but I actually do enjoy going out with Robert and helping him. I have days off during the week, so it's perfect. There's not a lot of people around when we do try to film, so it works out great.
Yeah, it's funny because as much filming as I've done, I still get embarrassed when there's a bunch of people around. So hopefully this kind of helps you guys understand who I am as far as that visual impairment goes. So maybe now understand that aspect of this podcast, why I'm doing this, is showing people that do not have visual impairments, that people that do have a visual impairment or any other disability are still functioning here in the society that we live in and can still do pretty much anything anybody else can do. We just happen to have some limitations here and there. Besides the history stuff, I also do genealogy work, and that is what episode number 2 is about, is the genealogical work that I am doing with Cheryl's family, and I am also doing some genealogical work on my daughter's boyfriend's family as well. And so that's part of what I do, and we'll talk a little bit here on this podcast about that genealogical work. I want to do an episode on Find a Grave, and I want to do an episode on Ancestry and Ancestry DNA, and I also want to do an episode on my own experience and my own story on ancestry and genealogy. So all of those will be coming up as future episodes. So hopefully you guys will look forward to hearing those as well. So what you'll get here on Digging Deeper is, like I said before, a lot of untold stories that aren't video worthy, but a lot of social type stories as well. While I was working on my history degree, lo and behold, I came up with a minor in California Studies, which is a sociology minor. I wasn't going in expecting to get that. It just happened. And so a lot of my work in California Unearthed and a lot of work here in Digging Deeper will be under the sociology aspect of history. And that's where these oral histories come into play, is about the people of California and what makes California so great. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this little glimpse into my life and why I'm doing what I'm doing and what this podcast is going to be all about. It is a work in progress. I have never done this before. I am new to podcasting, so I will be making mistakes and learning from those mistakes. So if you guys can bear with me and take this ride with me on the podcast world, I would appreciate it. So if you could just leave a review, obviously follow my podcast, I would appreciate that. And I just put the podcast up on Amazon Music, Apple Music, Google, and iHeartRadio, along with Spotify as well. So you can find it on all of those different platforms. We will see you guys on the next episode, episode number 2. I think you're going to really enjoy it. It is about a old Native woman from San Diego that happens to be Cheryl's 3 times great-grandmother. And we're going to talk about her life and her experiences in San Diego when we went down to visit where her 3 times great-grandmother came from. We'll see you guys on the next episode.